Hello everyone and welcome to another ProGuides Wild Rift video. My name is Irene and today we're going to be going over every minor rune in Wild Rift and we'll be ranking them. By the end of this, you'll know which ones I think are really good, which ones are incredible, and also the ones I think you should be avoiding. If this is the first video you're watching about runes, we also have a video on the keystones in Wild Rift, so I recommend checking out that video first before watching this one. If you also have a desire to discuss all things Wild Rift, we have a new ProGuides Wild Rift Discord that you guys can join, post builds in, ask questions, and even find people to play with. The link to the Discord is in the description below. Now, without further ado, let's talk minor runes. To briefly go over how things work with the Wild Rift rune system, you get to select a keystone, and then you get to select one domination, one resolve, and one inspiration minor rune for a total of 4 runes. It's a little different than what you may be used to if you're coming from League of Legends. Your keystone doesn't lock you into any tree, and there's a bit more freedom with the minor runes, giving you 6 options for each one. Let's start off by going over the domination runes. The domination minor rune slot is geared towards offense. Whatever you take in this slot is going to increase your fighting power in one way or another. The first rune, Brutal, is an amazing choice if you don't know what else to take, giving 7 AD and 2% armor penetration, or 14 AP and 2% magic penetration. You pretty much can't go wrong with this rune choice. The early game power of Brutal on both AP and AD champions is absolutely worth it, especially if you're playing a lane bully. I put this rune in the S tier for domination runes. Next is Gathering Storm, which grants you 2 AD or 4 AP every 2 minutes. In order for this rune to give you the same amount of AD or AP as Brutal, 8 minutes must elapse. And even then, you aren't getting the 2% armor or magic penetration. So around 10 to 12 minutes into the game is when this rune really kicks in for you in comparison to Brutal. But a lot of the time, the game is well on its way by then, and the stats you would have gotten from Brutal would have gotten more than enough use by then. Only take Gathering Storm over Brutal if you're playing for scaling specifically. Otherwise, Brutal is almost always a better choice. Gathering Storm is in my A tier. There's just way better options, and it's too situational to be placed in the S tier. Hunter Vampirism is the next minor rune we'll be talking about, gaining 2% physical vamp or 2% magic vamp. This rune also gives you 2 AD and 1% physical vamp, or 4 AP and 1% magic vamp, after you get a kill or assist on a unique champion, meaning you can only get it once per enemy for a total of 5 stacks, equating to 10 AD, 5% more physical vamp, or 20 AP and 5% more magic vamp. This rune is something that mid laners potentially could mess around with to give themselves some sustain during the early game, and then be a part of kills later on. Runes, though, are usually taken to assist you in a play pattern you already have, so I don't see this being taken on champions that don't want to roam around and make full use of this rune. And those that get assists easily like supports don't really want the stats that this rune offers. I put Hunter Vampirism in the A tier for domination runes. It's good, but you'll usually be taking it on junglers that can already clear the jungle, but it doesn't help you kill people until later into the game. So once again, just take Brutal instead. A really common rune that is taken on the PC version of League of Legends is up next, and that's Triumph. Triumph restores 10% of your missing HP when you kill or assist in a kill on a champion. In addition, you deal 3% more damage to enemies below 35% health. This rune is a lifesaver in the PC version, literally, and is usually taken because the other options that compete for the same spot as it just aren't very appealing. I like the addition of the 3% more damage to enemies below 35% health, and that would put this rune in the A tier for me based on raw strength, but it competes for the same slot as Brutal and other powerful runes, so it just isn't as good based on opportunity cost. You're giving up a lot to take this rune that only helps you situationally instead of all the time, which puts this rune in the B tier for me instead. Take this if you're really addicted to that high HP restore moment in the PC version, but just know if your opponents take a more offensive-oriented rune, you're going to feel the power difference. The second to last rune available in the selection of domination runes is Weakness. This rune makes it so that when you impair the movement of enemy champions, it makes them take 5% more damage in the following 5 seconds. This rune is absolutely S tier. This rune is crazy good, and you'll see almost all supports who can easily activate it take it, no question. Slowing, stunning, knocking up, or doing anything to impair the movement of an enemy champion makes them take 5% more damage from all sources, not just the champion activating the rune. So if an Alistar gets a headbutt pulverize onto an entire enemy team, he is allowing his entire team to do 5% more damage to everybody else on the enemy team. The amount of damage you'll get out of this is much higher than if you were to take any other rune in this selection. The highs on this rune are insane, and having control of the activation of it with no internal cooldown is disgusting. There's also a wide variety of slows available in the game, even in the form of items. So this rune could constantly be on in a team fight, and it really helps your team out. Having at least one champion on your team with weakness that can easily CC multiple targets is a must if you're trying to be competitive. And the final rune in the Domination rune slot that you can choose is Champion. Champion grants you 10% increased damage against champions, but you lose 5% of this bonus each time you die until the bonus disappears. This rune is actually really strong and really high risk. The odds of you dying 0 times in a game are extremely low, even for the best players. So, you have to get your slot's worth of power out of this rune early, but it isn't as powerful early game as you would think. If you deal 70 damage with basic attacks, you'll deal 77. The same as if you had taken Brutal minus the armor penetration effect on it. This rune is the best mid-game rune aside from weakness. It's even better than Gathering Storm if you make it to the mid-game unscathed. But otherwise, it's better to just take Gathering Storm or Brutal, putting this rune in the C tier because of the risk. That leaves us with Brutal and Weakness as our S tier runes, followed by Hunter Vampirism and Gathering Storm in the A tier, with Triumph in the B tier and Champion all the way at the bottom in our C tier. Next, we have the Resolve rune slot, based around defensive stats. These runes are going to provide something to do with HP, armor, or MR, and are usually something you want to adjust game to game based on what the enemy team is rocking. To be honest, I usually find the defensive runes in almost any game to be my favorite to choose from, so I'm excited about the options here in Wild Rift. The first Resolve rune available is Backbone. Backbone grants 10 armor or 10 magic resistance based on whichever stat you have less of. This rune is actually really interesting. It covers a weakness, but that's what items are supposed to do for you anyway. So this rune is something you would take if you don't want to build versus your lane opponent, but instead build for the game. For example, if you're a Baron lane solo laner versus a magic damage dealing champion, and the rest of the game is all physical damage dealers, you'd take this rune to give yourself 10 MR and then build towards countering the rest of the game. This rune is incredibly situational to get the best value out of it, but it will always give you 10 of one or the other resistance. But it's a little harder to control early game when you have to rely on base stats to give you the 10 resistances you want. This rune also competes against some other really good options, so I placed this rune in the C tier. It has value, but it could end up being worth 0 gold in some fights, whereas the rest of the Resolve lineup can give you really reliable stats. Next up is Conditioning. This rune gives you 8 bonus armor and magic resistance after 5 minutes of game time. 8 of each resistance means you have to take 8% more damage in order to die, since each point of armor or MR is 1% increased effective HP versus that type of damage, and this covers both types. 5 minutes also isn't long at all. This is a good option for a lot of tank champions that will scale up anyway, or for junglers that will be staying in their jungle early game and won't have to interact with enemy champions constantly during that time. That being said, this rune is still not completely universal, and I would place it in the B tier, but it's really close to being A tier though. And now we start getting into the really interesting Resolve runes, starting with Hunter Titan. This rune grants you 20 maximum health just for taking it. Then upon assisting in a kill or killing a unique enemy champion, you gain an additional 20 maximum health and 4% tenacity, which stacks up to 5 times for a total of a potential 120 HP and 20% tenacity from this rune. If you don't know what tenacity is, it reduces the duration of crowd control. I really like this rune a lot. This is going to be taken on almost all junglers when the enemy team has hard crowd control on it. Being able to access tenacity is never a bad thing at all. And although this rune needs to get kills or assists behind it in order to really scale up, the 20 maximum health right away gives you something to start out with, unlike Conditioning. I place this rune solidly in the A tier. It's going to be incredibly good on the champions and roles that want to take it, but some of the other options we'll go over cover more than this rune. But it is situationally the best in slot rune, depending on the game. The reason I said junglers as well and not supports, even though it's easy for them to get assists, it's because we have a rune that's even better for supports than this one, coming up that we'll go over shortly. But before that one, we'll cover Regeneration. Every 3 seconds, you regenerate 2% of your missing health or mana, based on whichever percentage is lower. This rune is really good for mid lane mana users or ADCs who bully their lane opponent. They'll trade with spells, have high HP, low mana, and will therefore constantly regen their mana back up to continue harassing. This rune also grows in relative strength, As the game goes on and your mana pool and HP pools increase, you'll be actually increasing the regen of this rune. It can be rather clutch as well if you end up taking a bad trade early on. This rune sits solidly in the top of the A tier for mid laners and ADCs. This will be your go-to rune almost every game if you play one of those two roles. Why is it just A tier then? Well, it's the best for the mid and ADC role, but isn't giga powerful like the next two runes. I mentioned earlier that supports get a really strong rune, and the rune named Loyalty was made specifically with supports in mind. Loyalty grants 2 armor and 5 magic resistance to you just for picking it up, and then also grants your closest allied champion 5 armor and 2 magic resistance. This rune is just purely raw stat goodness. This rune won't impact your gameplay, but you'll definitely feel stronger with it as opposed to without it. Same with the ADC that'll be alongside you. Every support in the game will take this rune unless you're running a heavy roaming support. This rune gives the support players some armor, but a decent amount of magic resistance, which is the primary type of damage that a support takes early on from skill shots. And it makes your ADC gain 5 armor and 2 magic resistance, which is fantastic for them as well. 5 armor in lane where they'll be trading autos is amazing. If you're an ADC player and your support takes this alongside weakness from the domination tree, and you take brutal, you're really going to feel much stronger in fights if your lane opponents opt out of taking those runes. This rune sits at the top, offering 14 stats worth of power at level 1, easily placing it in the S tier. And the final rune available in the resolve slot is Spirit Walker. This rune gives you 50 maximum health and 20% slow resistance. No conditions necessary. This rune is flat out S tier. Hunter Titan gives you 20 health and requires takedowns to even begin to get the tenacity and health close to this bad boy. Spirit Walker helps you from second 1 when you load onto the Rift. This rune is going to be a jungler, Baron laner, and support's best friend. If you don't know what else to take, I highly suggest taking Spirit Walker, since the amount of stats it gives you is more likely to save your life than anything else here aside from a fully stacked Hunter Titan. The slow resistance is also really underrated. It helps you get closer to your opponents faster, and it allows you to make ganks happen as well as peel for your team. That leaves us with Spirit Walker and Loyalty in our S tier, Regeneration and Hunter Titan in the A tier, Conditioning solidly in the B tier, and Backbone at the very bottom in the C tier. And now let's get into our final rune slot, the Inspiration slot. This rune slot is geared towards utility or some other bonus aside from offensive or defensive stats. There's some interesting ones among the choices here, so let's get right into these to finish up our minor runes. First up, we have Pathfinder. This rune gives 8% movement speed when in brush, the jungle, or in the river when out of combat. This rune is kind of lackluster. The biggest issue with it is that it provides no in-combat benefit and effectively has to be used for roaming or positioning, which isn't what you spend most of your time in the Wild Rift doing, since it's such a brawl and skirmish focused game. This rune is our C tier rune for the Inspiration slot. Next up though, we have a much more powerful rune with Mastermind. Mastermind makes you do 10% bonus true damage to epic monsters and turrets, as well as granting you an extra 100 gold and 500 experience upon taking or assisting in taking these objectives. Mastermind is super good. I expect this to be picked on all junglers. Not only is 10% bonus true damage amazing for taking Dragon and Baron, being able to actually kill Baron faster later on in the game makes it really worth it. And on top of that, 100 extra gold and 500 extra experience when you assist in taking any of those objectives? Show up to your winning lane, hit the turret a few times, leave, and boom. 500 experience is a lot, especially early. And a third of a kill in extra gold for just assisting in these objectives is massive. You may be thinking that this rune is really conditional, but the chance you get to use this rune is rather high as well, since in order to win, you need to take turrets, and this helps you snowball really quickly. If both junglers have this, it makes the swing when someone takes a dragon even more intense. And if one jungler has this and the other doesn't, and turrets start going down, that other jungler who doesn't have it is going to wish that they did. And not only is the chance that you're going to use this rune at some point in the game very high, even if you don't assist in any of the kills or any of the turrets, being able to do more damage to Baron to potentially steal it is never a bad thing. This rune is solidly in the S tier, no question. The Hunter rune for Inspiration is our next rune, called Hunter Genius, granting 2.5% cooldown reduction, and then having each unique champion takedown grant an extra 1.5% cooldown on top of that, stacking up to 5 times for a total of 10% cooldown reduction. This is an alright rune for supports and some mid laners to take. Overall though, it isn't really that great. It's a solid pick if you think you're going to snowball, but 10% cooldown reduction isn't an amazing reward for killing every enemy one time. This rune sits in the A tier for me, and it's really close to being B tier. Up next is an interesting rune that I have trouble actually valuing, and that's Sweet Tooth. This rune increases honey fruit healing by 25%, and each fruit also provides 20 gold. This rune can really help you out in losing lanes, where you'll be taking a ton of damage early on. Honey fruits spawn right by your turret in the lane, so it's easy to pick up after taking a bad trade, and you don't have to really go to the river or anything like the PC version. Situationally and in losing matchups, this is absolutely an A tier rune, but overall, it's B tier compared to some of the other runes you could take. So it's really good if you're in a bad matchup, but otherwise it's okay. You also have to use all of the honey fruit correctly and only pop them and pick them up when you've lost a big trade. If you end up having 80% HP and popping them and using a few of them, you really didn't use any part of the 25% increased healing because you maxed out on 2 honey fruit and you pick up all of them anyway. Our penultimate minor rune is Pack Hunter. This is an S tier rune for supports and A tier for junglers, but it does compete with Mastermind for the junglers. Pack Hunter says, while near ally champions, gain 2% movement speed. For each unique ally you participate in a takedown with, you gain 50 gold, and that ally also gains 50 gold. This is so good for supports, since they'll almost always have the 2% movement speed on. And the extra gold, not only do they get it, but also their allies get it from participating in a kill with them, which can help boost your team up and get things rolling. This rune is a must-take on all supports unless you're something that is offensively oriented spellcasting wise. Then you'll take our final rune on the list, and that rune is Monoflow Band. This rune makes it so that hitting an enemy champion with an ability or empowered attack permanently increases your maximum mana by 30, up to 300 mana. This rune is incredibly good for mid laners, ADCs, and some top laners. This rune also has a massive synergy with the Resolve rune Regeneration. You pretty much take Regeneration and Monoflow Band on all marksmen to dip into the synergy, and never have to worry about going ever again. This rune is S tier, even though it's near the bottom of it, but the synergies make it fantastic. It's super good, but it's not game-breaking. Thus, our Inspiration minor rune tier list is as follows. Mastermind, Pack Hunter, and Monoflow Band are all in the S tier, followed by Hunter Genius in the A tier, Sweet Tooth in the B tier, and Pathfinder in the C tier. The S tier runes are ones that will pretty much always be taken on the champions that can take them and make use of them, and the other 3 runes, although ranked lower, situationally can be taken, but they're more niche than anything. That's kind of to be expected with the Inspiration tree, which is geared towards utility more than anything. If the situation calls for it, you have an option somewhere in this tree to help you out, or cater to your playstyle. And that's going to do it for our minor runes rankings. There are definitely some exciting and some broken runes in Wild Rift. I think the ones most likely to get hit with nerfs are Brutal, Mastermind, and Spirit Walker. Those runes all occupy really valuable slots and monopolize them to the point I could even see roles other than jungle taking Mastermind to try and get that extra gold and experience early on in the game, as well as assisting in killing epic monsters late game. Let me know what you guys think of the runes as well as the tier list in the comments below. Don't forget to check out our Wild Rift Discord we mentioned earlier, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time, but until then, use these runes to make small but impactful adjustments to your champions and get those Ws.